Some stories begin with a spark. This one began with a stalled engine, a snowstorm, and a man who didn't ask questions. When a classic Buick Riviera broke down on a frozen Vermont road, the woman behind the wheel was running from more than just the weather. She carried grief, secrets, and an unopened letter from a mother long gone. The man who helped her, a quiet single father with calloused hands and a broken past, had no idea he was about to be written into a story he never asked to be part of. A story that would change them both. A forgotten car, a hidden legacy, and the kind of love that doesn't arrive loudly, but settles in gently, like spring thawing out the longest winter. This isn't just a romance, it's a quiet miracle, a reminder that sometimes the people who fix broken things are the ones most in need of being seen. If you love stories that restore your faith in people, the kind that make you breathe a little deeper and believe a little more, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. We tell stories that don't just pass the time, but leave something lasting in your heart. So, grab a warm drink, and let's begin. The snow came down like feathers that had lost their wings, soft, steady, and without mercy. Clara Winslow tightened her grip on the steering wheel of the 1965 Buick Riviera as the wind screamed across the ridge. The road, barely visible under a thickening blanket of white, twisted through the mountains like an afterthought. The heater sputtered in protest, offering little warmth. Her mother's old car had done well for the past 2 states, but now it was as if even it had grown tired. She glanced at the fuel gauge. Half a tank. But it wasn't the gas that concerned her. It was the strange knocking noise under the hood that had started an hour ago, just after she passed the welcome sign for Stonebridge, Vermont. A town so small it barely made the map. Her mother used to talk about Vermont in winter. "You've never seen quiet until you've seen Vermont in snow," she would say. Clara hadn't understood what that meant, until now. Out here, surrounded by silence and white, with no phone signal and no more music from the radio, even her thoughts sounded too loud. Then, with one cough and a shudder that vibrated through the floorboards, the Riviera died. Clara coasted to the side of the road, tires crunching softly in the powder. The engine gave a final sigh and stopped. The silence that followed was almost sacred. Only the ticking of cooling metal remained. She sat there for a long minute, her breath fogging the windshield. Then she leaned her head back and closed her eyes. Of course this would happen here. She popped the hood, though she knew nothing about engines. Her late mother had driven this car for over 20 years, and now Clara was driving it across 3 states because she couldn't bear to leave it in the garage. Not after the funeral. Not after the lawyers. The snow bit into her face as she stepped outside, her boots crunching into the powder. She lifted the hood and blinked. Steam rose slowly from somewhere beneath, curling like ghostly fingers into the air. She recognized nothing. Everything looked like parts of a clock that had no hands. And then, through the snow and silence, she saw it. A flicker of light. A warm amber glow not far beyond the line of pines that framed the road. Hope. Clara shoved the hood back down and wrapped her coat tighter, walking toward the light like a moth too cold to resist. The garage looked like something out of time. A squat wooden building with a sloped roof buried in snow. The front window glowed from within. A wooden sign, faded and weathered, read Carter's Auto Repair. Beneath it, someone had painted in red cursive, "Fixing more than engines." Clara hesitated. That second line felt oddly personal. She knocked. The door opened almost instantly. The man who stood there was tall and lean, dressed in a worn flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up, arms dusted with grease. His face was weathered but kind, with eyes the color of worn denim. He looked at her for exactly 1 second, then stepped aside without a word. "Come in before you freeze," he said, voice low and steady. She stepped inside. The air was warm, scented faintly of pine and old metal. A small wood stove in the corner crackled. Tools hung on every wall in impossible order. A car, an old '67 Impala, rested on a lift like it had been asleep for years. "I'm Clara," she offered. The man gave a small nod. "Silas." He didn't ask what she was doing out here. Didn't ask why she looked like she'd been running from something. Just poured a cup of coffee from an old metal thermos and handed it to her. She wrapped her hands around it, grateful for the heat. "My car broke down. A Buick Riviera, old one." His brow lifted slightly. "That's a good car." "It was," she said, half laughing, "until today." He studied her for a moment, then grabbed his coat and keys. "Let's go take a look." The Riviera sat motionless, snow clinging to every curve. Silas opened the hood with the gentleness of someone examining an old friend. His hands moved with practiced ease, checking, adjusting, listening. Clara stood beside him, unsure whether to speak. "What do you think?" she asked. "She's tired," he said simply. "Might have pushed her too hard, too long. Could be the timing chain, maybe worse." "I pushed a lot of things too hard," she murmured, then instantly regretted it. He didn't respond, just closed the hood and looked at the sky. Snow still fell, softer now. "You're not going anywhere tonight, not in that car." "I can get a motel," she said. Silas pointed to the far side of the property. "There's a cabin. It's small but warm. My daughter's at her grandmother's for the week, so it's empty." "You don't even know me." He looked at her then, not with suspicion, but with something closer to understanding. "You're cold, stranded, and driving a car older than both of us. That's enough." Clara didn't know what to say to that. Later, inside the cabin, she stood by the window and watched Silas walk back through the snow to his garage, his coat flapping lightly in the wind. He didn't look back. She set her bag down beside the narrow bed and opened the side pocket to retrieve her book. Instead, she found something else. An envelope, creased, faintly yellowed. Her name written in her mother's handwriting. Clara's fingers trembled. She had no memory of placing it there. She turned it over. The back was sealed with wax, her mother's initials in the middle. For a long time, she stared at it, her heart beating too loud for the quiet room. Then she sat on the edge of the bed, placed the envelope in her lap, and whispered aloud, "What did you want me to find here, Mom?" The cabin was small, but warm in the way that only wooden places can be. The heat from the wood stove spread evenly across the walls, and the quiet felt earned. Clara sat at the table with the unopened letter still in her hands, the wax seal catching the firelight like a glint of memory. She didn't open it that night. Somehow, she couldn't. Not yet. The envelope felt too heavy with ghosts, and the wind outside still howled like it had something to say. Instead, she tucked it into her coat pocket and stared at the shadows flickering across the ceiling until sleep finally found her. She woke the next morning to the smell of coffee. Stepping outside into the crisp, sharp air, she followed the scent to the garage. The snow had stopped, leaving behind a world so white and still it looked painted. Inside, Silas stood at his workbench, pouring coffee into a mismatched mug. He turned only slightly as she entered. "You sleep okay?" he asked, voice low and even. Clara nodded. "Yes, thank you, for everything." He handed her the mug without comment. Again, no questions, no small talk, no forced pleasantries. She took a sip, then walked slowly around the garage. It was cleaner than she'd expected for a working space. Neat rows of tools hung like soldiers on pegboards. The floor swept, the scent of oil and thyme deeply embedded in the walls. And then she saw it, her mother's Buick Riviera, its chrome catching the morning light like a memory polished back to life. He'd already moved it into the bay, hood up. "You work fast." He gave a half shrug. "Didn't sleep much." Clara turned toward him. "You always help strangers like this." Silas kept his eyes on the engine. "Strangers usually don't drive cars with stories." She tilted her head. "What does that mean?" He hesitated, then stepped back. "This car's not just old, it's kept, maintained, but not restored. There's history in here. Someone loved this car even when they didn't drive it anymore." Clara's chest tightened. "It was my mother's. She passed away 2 weeks ago." Silas didn't say "I'm sorry." He simply nodded, like he understood that grief wasn't something people wanted fixed. He spent the next hour beneath the hood, occasionally explaining what he was doing in that quiet, steady voice of his. Timing chain tension, carburetor misfire. One problem after another unraveled, but he never seemed overwhelmed. His hands moved with a kind of reverence, each tool an extension of some deeper thought. Clara found herself watching him more than the car. Silas wasn't handsome in a classic sense, but there was something striking about him. Something in the way he stood still while the rest of the world moved. He had the presence of a man who had learned to carry things silently. She didn't ask about his past. He didn't ask about hers. That balance became its own kind of comfort. Later, over toast and eggs in the garage's tiny break room, Silas finally asked the first real question. "Why here?" Clara blinked. "What do you mean?" "Stonebridge isn't on the way to anywhere. You'd have to want to come here." She hesitated, then reached into her coat and pulled out the envelope. She set it gently on the table between them. "My mother left this," she said. "I found it in the car after it broke down. I didn't even know it was there." He glanced at it but didn't reach for it. "You open it yet?" She shook her head. "Not yet." "Why not?" She looked down at her coffee, her voice softer now. "Because I'm afraid it's going to tell me something I should have known earlier. And then I'll have to live with the knowing." Silas didn't speak for a moment. Then, quietly, "Some things come to us when we're ready, not before." Clara looked up at him. "That sounds like something my mom would have said." Silas gave the faintest hint of a smile. Maybe she's still saying it. The afternoon passed slowly, in the best kind of way. Silas continued working on the Riviera, and Clara sat nearby with an old sketch pad she found in the cabin's nightstand. She used to draw all the time before life got too loud. Now the pencil felt awkward in her hand, but something about the stillness here made her want to try again. By sunset, she had drawn the front grille of the Riviera, curved, elegant, just like she remembered watching it pull into the driveway when she was little. "Not bad," Silas said, looking over her shoulder. "You sound surprised." "I just didn't figure you for someone who draws cars." Clara smiled. "I used to draw with my mom. She loved old things. Said everything back then had character. Cars, homes, even heartbreak." She was right. Silas returned to his tools. For a moment, the garage was filled only with the soft scratch of pencil and the click of a wrench, As night fell, Clara returned to the cabin. She lit the small lamp by the window and held the envelope in her hands once more. Maybe she was ready now. She broke the seal slowly. The paper inside was thick, folded twice, her name written in looping cursive at the top. My Clara, if you're reading this, it means I've already gone where you cannot follow. At least, not yet. I left that Riviera to you, not because it's worth anything. It's not, but because it knows pieces of me no one else ever did. That car once took me to a place where I remembered how to feel again. A quiet town, a kind man, a life I almost had. I'm not asking you to find what I lost, but maybe, just maybe, if you find yourself needing something true, you'll feel it too. Love always. Mom Clara pressed the paper to her chest, tears rolling quietly down her cheeks. A kind man, a quiet town. She looked out the window toward the garage, and for the first time in years, something in her heart stirred. Like an engine turning over for the first time in a long, long while. The morning light poured into the garage through its high windows, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Clara stood beside the Riviera, watching Silas work, her mother's letter folded and hidden inside her coat pocket like a heartbeat. She hadn't told him what the letter said. Not yet. Somehow it felt like this place and this man needed to be discovered gently. Like digging up a garden that had grown wild and still deserved to bloom. Silas was beneath the Riviera again, his voice calm as he explained something about the starter solenoid. Clara wasn't really listening. She was watching his hands. Strong, careful hands. The kind that didn't rush. The kind that belonged to someone who knew that fixing old things took time and patience. And maybe a kind of love. I think she likes you, Silas said from under the car. Who? The Riviera? He rolled out and looked at her. Your mom. Clara blinked. What makes you say that? He pointed to the undercarriage. This car's been babied. No rust where you'd expect it. The underbody's clean as a whistle for something that old. Someone wanted her to last. Clara stepped closer, crouched beside him. She always said it was the only thing she truly chose. Everything else in her life was expected. Silas nodded, wiping grease from his hands. Some folks live the life they're handed. Others try to build one that fits. Clara hesitated. Then, did you ever build one? There was a pause. Once, he said quietly. Didn't hold. Later that day, Clara wandered the edges of the property, letting the cold wind wake her up from the inside. She didn't know what she was searching for. Maybe signs, maybe echoes. She passed a line of trees near the edge of the garage lot and saw a wooden bench half buried in snow. The wood was worn, carved with initials, too faded to read. On impulse, she brushed off the snow and sat down. From here, she could see the curve of the hills, the quiet of the sky, and the garage tucked beneath it all, as if time had bent gently around this place and left it untouched. She pulled out her phone, still with no signal. The silence stretched. No buzzes, no emails, no calendar alerts. It was like the outside world had gone on pause, and she was being offered something else. Something slower, something real. That evening, over soup in the garage's small kitchen, Clara leaned her elbows on the table and watched Silas slice bread like a man who knew how to appreciate the act of making dinner, not just eating it. Can I ask you something? She said. You just did. She smiled. Seriously? He nodded. Did you ever know a woman, maybe 30 years ago, who drove a Buick Riviera like mine? Around here, I mean. His hands paused. just for a second. Barely long enough for most people to notice, but Clara noticed. He set down the knife slowly. That was a long time ago. That's not a no. Silas didn't look at her right away. He reached for the kettle, poured hot water into 2 mugs. The scent of chamomile filled the air. Finally, he spoke. There was a woman. She came through one winter. Her car broke down not far from here. She stayed in town a few weeks while I fixed it. Clara's breath caught. What was her name? He stirred honey into one of the mugs. Never told me. Said names made it harder to leave. Clara's heart pounded. She had dark hair, Silas continued, and a laugh like she didn't quite believe in it, but wanted to. She knew how to read people, but never told them what she saw. She didn't talk about her life, but she listened when others talked about theirs. Clara swallowed. That sounds like her. Silas placed the mug in front of her, then sat. She drove a Riviera, just like yours. I remember because it was the first car I ever worked on that made me wonder what it meant to fix something, but not to keep it. Clara looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. Did you love her? He didn't answer right away, just stared into the steam rising from his cup. I think I loved who she let me be when she was here. Clara felt the sting behind her eyes before she could stop it. The pieces were falling into place, gently, impossibly. She was my mother, she said. Silas didn't flinch, didn't blink. He just nodded. I know. For a while, they said nothing. The air between them wasn't heavy. It was reverent, as though something sacred had been unearthed, something long buried, but still whole. I didn't tell you before, Silas said softly, because I didn't want it to change why you stayed. Clara looked down. And why did I stay? He looked at her then. Really looked. I was hoping you'd tell me. That night, Clara returned to the cabin and opened the second page of her mother's letter. She hadn't noticed it before, folded neatly behind the first, almost hidden. It was dated 31 years ago. I wanted to stay, but I was afraid. He offered me nothing but warmth, quiet, and a chance to begin again. I wanted all of it. But sometimes we only realize the right place too late. If my daughter ever finds her way here, I hope she sees what I saw. Someone worth staying for. Clara read the last line twice. She folded the letter back and stared out the window, where the garage light still glowed like a lighthouse beneath the stars. And in her chest, something cracked open. Not in pain, but in possibility. Morning came soft and quiet, as if the world had decided to whisper instead of speak. Clara stood alone in the garage while Silas was out fetching parts from a nearby town. She wandered through the space with slow steps, as if she might disturb something sacred if she moved too fast. The Riviera rested under a large canvas cover. The smell of old oil and fresh coffee lingered in the air. Outside, snow still blanketed the hills, but the sky had cleared, a bright, pale blue stretching above the evergreens. She had not slept much. The letter from her mother, both pages now, had turned over and over in her mind, like a vinyl record she couldn't turn off. The knowledge that her mother had once stood in this very garage, shared meals with Silas, and even maybe loved him. It wrapped around her like a second skin. And then there was Silas himself, so still, so solid. She'd never met anyone who made silence feel like an invitation instead of a wall. Clara drifted toward the back of the garage, where a corkboard hung beside an old desk. It was cluttered with notes, faded invoices, postcards with worn edges, and photographs that looked like they hadn't been moved in years. Most people wouldn't have noticed it. A small, folded square of yellowed paper, thumbtacked in the upper corner. But something about the handwriting called to her. She stood on tiptoe.